Just a 9/11 investigator. I'm also a student of true crime. When I studied psychology in college in the early 1990s, it was this area of study that really piqued my interest. So this video today will be concentrating on a specific crime that happened just last year. It is the Idaho State murders, in which Bryan Kohberger is the suspect in those murders. And today we're going to be reading from a number of news articles and documents relating to the case. One of the things that really fascinates me about the topic of true crime is that there is no ceiling when it comes to the depravity of the human mind. And this is something that's going to be a little bit different than most of my videos I put out online. And this story actually took a very passionate interest in me, only because of the nature of the killings and the individual behind it. Now, for some of you, you may say, well, what's so interesting about this person and what's so interesting about this case? And what I'm going to do in today's video is I'm going to be playing a video of the court case of the pretrial hearing of Bryan Kohberger. I want to make this quite clear that Bryan Kohberger is indeed a suspect. He is not guilty of any of these crimes. In fact, he's currently pleading not guilty to all four of these people that were killed at this residence in Moscow, Idaho. And what I'm going to do is in today's video, I'm going to read from a number of different news articles and news links in which I will provide in the description for you to read as well, and talk about the state of mind. Now, again, I'm not a professional. This is only my own opinion regarding the psychology of the suspect behind the murders, if we are to speculate that he is indeed guilty of the crimes. But he is afforded the guilty of being innocent of these crimes because he's not proven to be guilty at all. And so I'm going to be reading from a number of articles and links and giving you a timeline about this crime if you're not at all knowledgeable about this subject. In the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., 4 University of Idaho college students were stabbed to death in a shared rental home close to campus, in which 3 of them had actually resided in. All 3 of the female victims that were killed were Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, and Xana Kernodle. They all lived at the house, while the 4th victim, Chapin, who was Kernodle's boyfriend, was sleeping over on the night of the attacks. There were 2 other female roommates who lived at this house, but they were not attacked and they weren't injured. But earlier on in the evening of November 12th, 2 of the 4 victims, Chapin and Kernodle, were at the on-air campus party at the nearby Sigma Chi fraternity between the hours of 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. They returned home at 1:45 a.m., and that's according to the New York Times, dated November 20th, 2022, and CNN, dated November 17th, 2022. That evening, the other 2 victims, best friends Mogen and Goncalves, had gone to the Quarter Club, which was a downtown sports bar, at 10 p.m., from which they departed at 1:30 a.m. A live streamed video from Twitch from the Grub Truck, which is a food truck just 4 blocks south at Friendship Square, which is located on Main and 4th Street, showed Mogen and Goncalves at 1:41 a.m., where they were chatting and smiling and getting their food 10 minutes later and leaving to take what the police initially said was an Uber ride home, a trip about 1 mile from their where they ordered the food from. Now, there is a short video which was uploaded of all places on TikTok, showing the last known video of the victims at this food truck, in which I will play and show you regarding, or I'll just link it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to link it to the description. So that's what I'm going to do, so you could see it for yourselves. All 4 students were home by 1:56 a.m. 7 uncompleted phone calls were made from the phone of Goncalves and a former longtime boyfriend, a fellow student, between the hours of 2:26 to 2:52 a.m. Mogen also called the boyfriend 3 times with similar results from between 2:44 a.m. and 2:52 a.m. These calls were investigated. And with the police concluding they did not believe that he was involved in the crime, Kernodle received a DoorDash order around 4 a.m. The 2 surviving roommates have returned home by 1 a.m. An original report said they were in their beds on the ground floor of the 3-story building at the home of the killings. They were not attacked or held hostage. An original report stated that both surviving roommates did not awaken during the killings, which was pretty unusual considering that all 4 of these people were stabbed to death. You would think that there would be shouts of pain and whatnot, but they probably were caught off guard. However, the affidavit for the case stated that one surviving roommate was sleeping on the 2nd floor, the same floor as Kernodle and Chapin, before she was awoken by what sounded like Goncalves and her dog, and later a roommate saying something to the effect of "there's somebody here." Now, I want to talk about that for a minute because that's important. The person who was involved with that, the person who was who actually was awakened by some of the noises, is a friend of theirs, and her name is actually identified as DM. Now, later on, DM would be known as oh, I forgot her name already. Oh, that's going to kill me. Dylan something. It was Dylan something, and yeah, I'm gonna. Oh man, that's gonna kill me. I'm gonna have to look it up real quick, and I hate doing that when I'm doing a video like this. But yeah, she was on the ground floor. Dylan. Well, that's a killer. Yeah, you'll have to forgive me for that one. I forgot her name. It's just a momentary lapse of reason. Well, anyway, she basically heard people crying, and there was a number of things. By the way, her name is Dylan Mortensen. Sorry for the forgetful nature. I'm 53. Forgive me. Dylan Mortensen actually heard some noises, including whimpering and crying of certain girls. And according to the NBC Bay Area article, which I'll link in the bottom of the description, in the affidavit, she said she opened the door when she heard someone crying and saw a man wearing a mask that covered his nose and mouth. She testified saying that the roommate said the man walked toward her and walked past her toward a sliding glass door as she stood in a frozen shock phase. After seeing the person whom she did not recognize, she locked herself inside a room, as she told authorities. But however, she didn't relate the information to the police until 8 hours later. Now, there's been a lot of feedback about why Dylan Mortensen didn't call police. Now, what I'm going to describe is the definition of psychological shock, as I understand it. And if you go to sites like Psychology Today, it'll give you the clearer definition of what psychological shock is. And by thoroughly understanding this reaction, you'll understand why she basically didn't call the police. And there are different types of events that trigger psychological shock. It could be a car accident. It could be witnessing something very horrifying, like what she saw, or being at the dentist, or even being stopped by police, getting sued, or some other financial related stress. something that would put you in a very disoriented and very paralyzing state of mind. And when it comes to hearing people crying or people in distress, and then seeing some strange man who is considered very tall wearing a mask at 4:30 a.m. inside your house, you're going to be very horrified, because you don't know if he has a weapon or whatnot. You don't know what he's there to do, maybe to do you harm. People react very differently. And, there was an article by the Daily Mail in which there was an incident that happened in 1992 where an ex-Buffalo University student who found her sorority sister in a blood-soaked room, who later defended Dylan Mortensen, saying that she waited 6 hours to call the cops after coming face to face with her killer, and says, I live with survivor's guilt. And her name was Alana Zabel, who's 50 now, and found her sorority sister and roommate close to death, but found her sorority sister killed while facing her killer face to face. And so she didn't call the cops until 6 hours later. So yeah, everybody reacts differently. And, people tend to be in a state of shock longer than most people. And believe me, if you're a small girl like she was, and if you ever look at the photos of the victims involved in this case, they're all small and they're all very young, 20, 21 years old. And you see this, creepy looking guy. And if it actually is Bryan himself, Bryan Kohberger, he has the look, that look. And believe me, he's, like I said, he's afforded innocence. This guy is not convicted of a crime, and he's presumed innocent of the crime. But, just looking at him and seeing his mannerisms, he definitely fits the bill. But that doesn't mean anything, does it? So what is this? What else is happening during this time? Well, the roommate who heard her crying was said to be Goncalves. Although investigators also believe this might have been Kernodle speaking, as a forensic download of her cell phone showed that she was on the app TikTok at 4:12 a.m., meaning that she was awake. Security cameras near the home picked up the sound of whimpering, a loud dud, and a dog barking numerous times, starting around 4:17 a.m. Now, also, I have to say that the crime scene photos, the security camera footage, all this is not going to be public, because this is going to be used in the trial against Bryan Kohberger. The surviving roommate opened her door twice within a short span of time, and it was the second time when she heard what sounded like crying coming from Kernodle's room, and a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." And the surviving roommate opened her door a third time, and that's when she saw a figure clad in black clothing with a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking toward her, but then walked toward the backsliding door window. The victims were not gagged or restrained, and the walls at the scene were splattered with blood. Mogen and Goncalves were found in Goncalves' bedroom, and Kernodle and Chapin were found in Kernodle's room. According to Bill Warner, who's a legendary investigator out of Sarasota, Florida, who's been really invested in the case, said that the crime scene, according to his sources, was extremely brutal, including very open, gaping wounds to Goncalves, which shows that this was a lust killing or a passion killing. And to identify what a lust killer is, a lust murder is unique, and it's actually distinguished from the sadomasochistic homicide of the involvement of a mutilating attack. Basically, two types of individuals commit lust murders. One is the organized non-social, and the other is the disorganized asocial personality disorder. The organized nonsensical type feels rejection by and hatred for the society in which he lives in. His hostility is manifested overtly, and the lust murder is its final expression. Now, the disorganized asocial type also feels hatred for the world, but is withdrawn, internalized, until he acts out his fantasy in the murder, in which certain factors can indicate the personality type involved in a lust murder, such as the location of the body evidence of torture or mutilation prior to the death, the smearing of the victim's blood, evidence of rape, and the availability of physical evidence at the murder scene in which the crime is premeditated. Yet, it is also a crime of opportunity in which the victim is not usually known to the murderer, and that the use of psychological profiling in such crimes may be of assistance in determining the personality types involved, but couldn't or must not alter or replace prescribed investigative measures, or as the footnotes are given, regarding the identification of these two types of lust murders. And according to CBS News, which I'll link in the bottom description, the affidavit states that according to Dylan Mortensen, after the crime was committed, she didn't come out of her room. And so what happened is a little bit unclear. So according to investigators, it was later in the morning when a call was made to 911 from one of the surviving roommate's phones to report an unconscious person. And it is unclear what occurred in the hours before police were called. It's believed the murders took place between 4 and 4:25 a.m. Police say when they went to the house, they discovered on the bed in Madison's room a knife sheath with a maritime insignia. And according to James Galigno, who is a journalist and a security and law enforcement analyst, he would say to CBS News, quote, "I would imagine that as a crime scene, as grisly and ghastly as this one, that there would have been DNA left by the perpetrator," end quote. Now, according to that same affidavit I brought up earlier, the knife sheath was processed, and the Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA on the button snap. And it just so happened that was a really miraculous catch, because there was no other DNA in the crime scene. And especially in a stabbing, where DNA, sweat, because, you know, it takes a lot of a person to stab somebody. And if you stab somebody 4 times, you know, there's 4 stabbing victims here, you would think that takes it exerts a lot of energy. So this guy was sweating, unless he actually cleaned the crime scene, or this guy basically was covered from head to toe. I don't know. Now, they were able to link that strand on the button snap to DNA recovered from the trash at the Pennsylvania Kohberger family home, because the FBI profilers decided to run his DNA, but yet this guy never committed a crime. Now, I'm going to get to that in a minute. So I'm going to read more about the details. No calls, no 911 calls were made until 11:58 a.m. That is 8 hours after the early morning killings. At that time, a call was made from inside the residence from the cell phone of one of the surviving students, as I mentioned before, who talked about the unconscious person. Now, the unconscious person was a stabbing victim. We don't know who that is, but when police arrived, the door at the home was open. There were no signs of forced entry or damage inside the home, and nothing appeared to be missing. So this wasn't a robbery. The 2 surviving roommates were in the residence when the police arrived, as were other friends of the victims. Now, I don't know, it had to be that they called friends of the victims, or that the victims came to the house, without knowing what happened. I don't know the details, and it's not reported yet. The surviving roommates had called friends over to the house because they believed one of the second floor victims was unconscious and was not waking up. The identity of the 9/11 caller was not released, but they didn't know what was happening on the third floor either. They didn't leave their rooms until the police came in and saw. Strange atmosphere, right? Right around this time. Very strange. All 4 victims were pronounced deceased by 12 noon. Now, detectives believe the killings occurred again, 4 a.m. to 4:25 a.m. And according to the pathologist, Bader, he claims that the killings were rather quick. And according to what I'm reading from Bill Warner, that the wounds were there was no way that these guys, that they suffered for long. They were killed right away. That night, officers came upon Goncalves' dog, which she shared with her ex-boyfriend, alive and unharmed at the house. And it was actually handed over to what police said was a responsible party, but we don't know who that is. On the evening of November 13th, the university canceled classes, and by November 14th, they scheduled a candlelight vigil to be held at the administration building lawn on the evening of November 16th. And according to online sleuths from Reddit, they happened to find a video of the candlelight vigil at the university, and they may have found Kohberger actually there. It's not known to be him, but when I saw the video, it looked eerily similar to him. We can't say it was him, but when it comes to lust killers, when it comes to serial killers, the pattern is they like to go to candlelight vigils, or they like to go to search parties to make it believe that, hey, they're innocent of crime and they care, to throw off investigators. But what they also like to do is revisit the crime scene. And one thing about lust killers like Son of Sam, BTK, is like they enjoy going back to the scene of crime because it's not about sex. It's about power. It's about dominion. And one of the most egregious sexual deviants of our time, the Marquis de Sade, who wrote some of the more exploratory books, such as Justine, in which describes the carnal nature of sex in its most primitive fashion, describes that there is nothing more sexually pleasing than human dominion. Not even the act of sex is as sexually arousing or pleasing than having human dominion over another person. The investigation of the stabbings is conducted by the Moscow Police Department, supported by, of course, the Idaho State Police and the Latah County Sheriff's Office. In all, almost 130 members of law enforcement from 3 agencies began working on the case. On November 19th, police requested the public provide any video of the house that had been recorded that night of the killings, and a phone tip line and email were created for students and others to potentially submit evidence to officials. And by December 5th, it was reported that they received 2,600 email tips and 2,700 phone calls, and of course, 1,000 digital media submissions from the public to these tip lines. There was a whole bunch of information they had to go through. The Latah County coroner conducted autopsies of all 4 victims on November 17, 2022. And she said they all appeared to have been stabbed multiple times with fatal wounds in the chest and upper body with a large knife. At least one victim with what appeared to be defensive stab wounds on her hands, and possibly more, appeared to have tried to fend off their attacker, and the victims may have been attacked while sleeping. None showed signs of any sexual assault and toxicology reports were pending. And later on, according to the New York Times, dated November 20th, 2022, there was very low alcohol levels. All 4 deaths were deemed homicide by stabbing. They were not tied, they were not gagged, and no weapon had been recovered, though the police believe the killer or killers used a fixed blade knife. And the police, of course, left open the possibility that there could be more than one perpetrator. Police stated that they believe it was a targeted attack, but have not concluded if the target was the residents or its occupants. In a November 21st press conference, the Moscow police chief said that the authorities have received a number of tips, including that Goncalves allegedly had a stalker, but was unable to verify the claim or identity of such individual at that time. Now, what I'm going to do is basically show you a video of somebody who actually was known to the suspect. I'm going to be playing a video of somebody who is actually known to the suspect, Bryan Kohberger.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I mean, I was, just like sleeping here on the couch in my parents' house, and I woke up to all these tweets that were like, oh, they got the guy. And of course, this has been something that everyone in Pullman has been following, everyone in the whole Pullman, Moscow area. And so, I look on my phone and I see the guy's name and I see the picture. And I'm thinking, that looks a lot like my TA who's also named Bryan, but that would be crazy. And so I went and I checked my email, to see the emails I'd had with him, and the name matched and everything. And yeah, it was just like totally jarring, totally shocking to realize that this person that had been, kind of grading my papers was, allegedly this like horrible murderer. Yeah, no, entirely. All our interactions came in the form of the class, and not even like, office hours. Like, it was all within the confines of a lecture hall. He was pretty strict as far as grading goes. When he came into class, he was very, not super mentally present. He would stand up at the front, look at the ground. He had a lot of like boilerplate responses he would give people rather than, maybe something he had thought up on the spot. It seemed like he would be, he'd come in knowing what he was going to say to like most interactions. And then when he would grade your papers, he would be grading you on what he ended up calling like a higher standard. But what it really felt like to us was he was grading us like he would have graded himself as a PhD student. And so that was just kind of like, we were all annoyed by him. And so I knew his name, I knew like, oh, TA Bryan, like he sucks at this. Like he's grading us too harshly. And that was like an annoyance. But obviously beyond that, we just thought he was a little weird and kind of, a bad grader. Yeah, he actually only left me good comments, which is just kind of silly. Like the only ones I could send in were nice ones, but for most people, he was being pretty harsh in the comments. I just, for whatever reason, he was being pretty good to me. Yeah, actually, we had, our professor was big on the idea that like, if we're all going to be attorneys someday, then we have to know how to argue our case. And so he scheduled a day where everyone, came in ready to argue to get their grades up, and he brought in Bryan and he was like, all right, go at him. And he had Bryan stand up, and everyone was, like a few people were on his side because they wanted to keep their high grades and not like have questions be cut out or whatever. But for the most part, it was like, half of a 150 person class just asking him all these real critical questions, and he would answer. And he'd actually, he tried pretty hard to defend himself, which was the kind of thing that our professor loved. He wanted the like courtroom environment. And so, so there was just a period of class where we were all sort of arguing about this. Not, I mean, it wasn't like yelling or anything, but it was certainly conflict, Yeah, we just, it would have been about a month before winter break when like the murders happened. And we didn't obviously build our framework for this around that because we had no reason to connect him to that, you know, at the time. But definitely around then, he started grading everybody just 100s, not like you pretty much if you turned something in, you were getting high marks, and he stopped leaving notes. It was just, you know, he seemed preoccupied is what I would have said at the time. And now obviously he seems like he was probably pretty preoccupied, but it was, yeah, it was much easier. You'd turn in whatever you wanted pretty much, and he was just grading them up and sending them back. Like, yeah, yeah, absolutely. He probably that I saw, he was always a little bit spotty on whether or not he'd come to class because he had, you know, whatever PhD stuff over the top of it. But the couple times that he did come after or around that time period, I remember him, you know, he had like a little bit more facial hair, just like stubble, but definitely less like well kept than he was. And he was a little quieter. You know, he didn't, he used to stand up at the start of class and like talk about some stuff sometimes. And this time he didn't really do that at all. He was definitely, I think, like the previous like mental preoccupation that we had been noticing, where it was like, you know, he didn't really want to be there. That was at like an all-time high, and he just, you know, didn't look like he was doing great.
As you can see, there's radical behavior change regarding the students of Bryan Kohberger, who basically said that he saw a slight erratic change in his behavior during the time frame of when the murders occurred. Now, as for the issuance of what was going on regarding the days after the murder and why police took their time regarding gathering evidence, well, there wasn't much evidence until the FBI got involved. Now, according to Bill Warner, his investigation through his sources saw that the FBI collected an enormous amount of intelligence data regarding Kohberger's cell phone. Now, this is huge because I think this is going to be the case where they could tie him to the murders. Now, according to Bill Warner again, phone records dating back to June 2022 revealed that Kohberger stalked his victims before the murder. And this is months before the incident took place. His phone actually pinged in the coverage area of the student house on at least 12 occasions prior to the evening of November 13, 2022. All of these occasions, except for one, occurred in the late evening and early morning hours of their respective days, the time of day you would do surveillance on a location. And on top of that, Kohberger was getting surveillance photos and video of the occupants located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, where the murders took place. And for those who want to say, well, who is that person in the video that was talking? Kohberger has a PhD in criminal justice and criminology, in which he studied at the University Washington State University, in which this student, I won't give his name, that was talking in video, shared the same class as him. And on top of this, Kohberger also studied mass serial killers, including serial killers like Ted Bundy, BTK, and Danny Rolling. And there's an article by TMZ in which I'll share with the description, and where the entitlement is called "Bryan Kohberger Has Serial Killer Traits Just Like Me," in which the BTK killer, David Rader, basically said in an email he shared with TMZ, said that Bryan Kohberger shares some of the traits, and that one of his own attacks, which was a quadruple homicide, is eerily similar to the Idaho student slangs. BTK is short for bind, torture, and kill, in which Rader said to TMZ in the email, he believed Kohberger would be in wait for his victims, much like he did, stalking them and casing their home. All of this, BTK would later say, was much like what I did, referencing Kohberger's dark mind, which he can relate to or empathize with. BTK also pointed out chilling parallels between the brutal 1974 murders of the Otero family, which took place in Kansas, and the 4 slain University of Idaho students. According to BTK, he wrote an email, murder 4, much like the Oteros, up close and personal stabbed, in which he wrote in a notebook. He went on to mention that Kohberger left DNA at the crime scene just like he did at the Otero house, leaving his semen on one of the victims' bodies. It took police years to link BTK to the crimes after advancement in DNA technology. However, Kohberger was soon connected to the Idaho murders after his DNA was found on a knife sheath. Now I'm going to talk about that, about how they got the DNA from connected to him. Investigators traced the ownership of a vehicle that was found in the days prior to the killings, and also on the video of a local residents that showed it that there was this white Hyundai Elantra that was made between the years 2010 to 2015. And Elantra had been imaged by a camera in the area of the killings around the times that took place, and also regarding the stalking of the victims in videos prior. We're not going to see that because that's going to be used in the trial. Investigators traced the ownership of the vehicle to a local individual, Bryan Kohberger, who drove the car with his father to Pennsylvania for the holidays, but was pulled over twice within a nearly 5-mile radius by Indiana State Police on Interstate 70 outside of Greenfield, Indiana, for speeding and tailgating. And it was this video that showed that.
Recording.
Hello.
How you doing?
How y'all doing today? Good, good. Take a look at your driver's license real quick if I could. See, he's right up on that van, man. He was right up on the back end of that van. Pulled you over for tailgating. Is this your car? Okay. Cool. Where are you headed?
Well, we're coming from WSU, and we're scanning early.
What's WSU?
Yeah, I go to the university basically. In real estate, incident that was occurring up there. There's a shooting incident. That is SWAT team and everything. All together.
So we're okay. I'm having a hard time hearing you because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University,
Yeah.
and you're going where? Oh.
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Pocono Mountains. Yeah. So we're slightly punchy because we're driving for hours.
Hours, days.
Hours. We're driving. Well,
Yeah.
almost a day.
Okay. And what did you say about some SWAT team thing? Or
Yeah,
something?
there was a mass shooting and everything. We don't
Where?
know if it was a mass
Where?
shooting. This was essentially what ended up happening
Interesting.
well, it's horrifying because he's going to the university, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So y'all work at the university there?
I actually do work there.
Oh,
PhD in criminal
okay. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard about that incident? Just yesterday, or?
This happened this morning, so I don't know. About an hour and a half ago, they're still wrapping it up for investigating. I'm not sure there's two shooters because they did shoot somebody.
Let's see.
And then you don't know about that actually. They were there, they were shooting out of the window or something.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So do me a favor, don't follow too close, okay? All right. Thank you.
Now, in regards to the DNA evidence, when the authorities found out that the white Elantra was driven by Kohberger, the next step was to profile him and to follow him, investigate him. Now, the FBI became involved. And the FBI, when they were staking out Kohberger's residence, they actually collected trash, according to New York Post, by the way, which is dated January 6th of 2023. The FBI collected trash from the family home of the accused Idaho killer, Bryan Kohberger, in order to link him to the gruesome quadruple murders. The DNA profile recovered on December 27th from the garbage of Kohberger's parents' house in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, matched that of the knife sheath left at the crime scene, according to police probable cause affidavit. The DNA analysis, which was conducted the following day in the Idaho State Lab, showed a sample from the trash belonged to Kohberger's father, Michael, with more than 99% accuracy. At least 99% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father, the document said. The DNA appeared to be the final link needed to allow authorities to confidently conduct an early morning raid on the Kohberger residence on December 30th and arrest Bryan Kohberger on charges of 4 counts of homicide by knife. What's interesting about Kohberger is that he has no criminal record, and that the crucial piece of evidence on the sheet seemed to be the only DNA connected authorities had to Kohberger, who actually adamantly denies all of the murders. And also, I think what is going to be a huge piece of evidence is the cell phone pings from his phone in the area of the residence, 12 days that he was there. And what we believe is him stalking out the residents and conducting surveillance. It's also alleged that the DNA that was found was also a DNA that connected him was from a genealogy website as well, which is astounding when you think about it. I forgot the name of the website that got to him. And I'm going to read from, I'm going to read from an Insider article dated January 7th. And it says that Idaho authorities that recovered DNA from the knife sheath found that the Idaho killings, matching it to his father's DNA and also to his DNA, that was found in a genealogy website. Claire Glynn, a forensic genealogy expert at the University of New Haven, told Insider the technique is often used in criminal cases where the suspect's DNA samples return no matches in the CODIS database. That is the FBI's combined DNA index system, short for CODIS. And what happened was Glynn said the first thing authorities would have done after checking the CODIS database is put the suspect's DNA sample through a process known as SNP sequencing, which searches for different markers in DNA than those that are regularly examined in the forensic process. This SNP sequencing is the same type of DNA analysis that companies like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe perform to give customers insight into their ancestries. From there, authorities upload the suspect's SNP data to a database called the GED Match Pro, a software which is reserved for law enforcement's use in authorized criminal investigations. Then the authorities compared the suspect's SMP data to the data of members of the general public who have consented to their DNA being used in law enforcement investigations. Now, Glynn said roughly 2 million members of the general public have voluntarily downloaded their DNA data from sites like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe and uploaded it to the GED Match Pro. Of those 2 million people, at least one of them ended up being related to Bryan Kohberger, which helped lead authorities to him. Now, like I said, it was Kohberger's father, which uploaded their DNA data to GED Match Pro. But Glenn also said it could have been someone as close as a first cousin or even a distant fourth or fifth cousin. And she went on later to say that forensic genetic genealogists would have built out a massive family tree around this one relative using public records like birth records, death records, marriage records, and immigration records, and even social media posts to find the most recent common ancestor between the suspect and the DNA relative in the database. This awfully sounds a lot like what the NSA does regarding signals intelligence, collecting our emails, our text messages, which lead into a branch out effect, who the people we're talking to, who the people we're sharing information with. And that shows almost like a genealogy branch of people that we're commiserating with and people that, you know, we consider family or friends or close associates and confidants. And it actually shows a profile of that one person. And it's amazing what they do. Now, prior to the arrests, the FBI monitored Kohberger's residence and his parents' residence in the Pennsylvania home. He was seen multiple times by the FBI wearing surgical gloves and was seen putting trash bags outside of the garbage can of a neighbor, not his own trash, but his neighbor's. The items were then collected and sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing, in which authorities said that Kohberger had cleaned his car inside and outside, not missing an inch. And also, investigators obtained cell phone data that showed that Kohberger's phone stopped connecting to the network around 2:47 a.m. in Pullum on November 13th, before reconnecting around 4:48 a.m. in Blaine, Idaho, which is after the murders. Now, according to investigators, it took approximately 13 minutes to kill 4 people. Also, when he reconnected the phone at 4:48 a.m., Blaine, Idaho, he was near State Highway 95 South, just south of Moscow, Idaho, where the murders took place. Cell phone data also showed that he was near his victim's residence around 9 a.m. on November 13th, approximately 5 hours after the killings. Remember what I said about lust killers and serial killers. They like to revisit the crime scene, which revisits their stimulation of the murders. Police also obtained data that indicated he was near the residence at least 12 times, like I said before, between June 2022 and the night of November 13th. The surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen, basically said when she saw the suspect, she described him as a male stranger that was around 5 feet 10 inches, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. If you look at the picture of Bryan Kohberger, he is basically that tall. He does have bushy eyebrows. So, and he's not very physically imposing. Interesting to note. But like I said, looks does not convict a person. Kohberger was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 felony count of burglary, and was appointed a public defender and detained without bond, obviously, at the Monroe County Correctional Facility in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. On his return to Monroe County Courthouse on January 3rd of 2023, he agreed to extradition. He was extradited on January 4th to take it to Latah County Jail, where he's being held currently without any bail. On January 5th of 2023, Kohberger made his first public appearance in Latah County Court, in which, all right.
Please be seated. We are on the record in the Second Judicial District, Latah County. This is the Magistrates Division of District Court. This is State of Idaho versus Bryan C. Kohberger, cause number CR 29222805. Mr. Kohberger is present in court. He is in custody. He is appearing with his attorney, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings, on behalf of the state. This is the time set in the matter for initial appearance. Mr. Kohberger, I am going to advise you of the rights that you have in this case. I am going to go over the criminal complaint with you, and then we're going to discuss setting the matter for further hearing. You have the following rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to the presumption of innocence. That means the state bears the burden to prove that you are guilty of this offense beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to a preliminary hearing. A preliminary hearing is a probable cause hearing. At that hearing, the state must establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. You have a right to have that hearing within 14 days if you remain in custody. If you are bound over at that preliminary hearing to district court, if the court finds probable cause, you would be bound over to district court. And at that time, you can enter a plea of not guilty, and you can have a jury trial set within 6 months of your appearance in district court. At both your preliminary hearing and your jury trial, you have the right to confront and question any evidence or witnesses called against you. Call witnesses on your own behalf and compel witnesses to be present and testify at the state's expense. You have the right to be represented by a lawyer. If you cannot afford one, one could be appointed to represent you based upon your financial need. You also have the right to appeal any conviction in your case. Do you understand these rights?
Yes.
I am now going to go over the criminal complaint with you. Count 1 of the criminal complaint charges you with the felony offense of burglary. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, State of Idaho, did unlawfully enter a residence located at 1122 King Road, Moscow, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder in violation of Idaho Code 18-1401 and 1403. The maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is not less than 1 year in prison, no more than 10 years in prison, and or a $50,000 fine or both. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 2 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, State of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogen, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. The maximum penalty for this offense, if you were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 3 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, State of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Kaylee Goncalves, a human being, by stabbing Kaylee Goncalves, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is death and/or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 4 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being, by stabbing Xana Kernodle, from which she died, in violation of Idaho Code 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. Again, the maximum penalty for that offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and/or imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
Count 5 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13th of 2022 in Latah County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being, by stabbing Ethan Chapin, from which he died, in violation of Idaho Codes 18-4001, 4002, 4003, and 4004. And again, the maximum penalty for this offense, if you plead guilty or are found guilty, is up to death and imprisonment for life. Do you understand?
Yes.
And Mr. Kohberger, would you like to represent yourself, hire a lawyer, or see if you qualify for court-appointed counsel?
I have court-appointed counsel.
What would lead a 28-year-old criminology doctoral student at the Washington State University to lead to the murder of 4 young individuals? Was it about revenge? Was this a lust killing? Was this a spree killing? What kind of murder took place here? And in order to do that, we have to understand the psyche about Kohberger. And in this video, we'll hear from an expert who thinks that he doesn't suffer from any unusual abnormalities.
Forensic psychologist Dr. John Delatorre weighs in on how it's applied and how the likelihood of it fitting into this case.
So in Idaho, they're not exactly taking away mental illness as part of the defense strategy. They're just simply only going to allow it to be a part of the overall intentionality that someone may have when it comes to committing these crimes. So certain crimes, right, certain degrees of felonies have certain kinds of ways in which someone intentionally does something. So for a first-degree murder, the person has to knowingly or purposefully engage in these kinds of acts. So essentially what we're saying is that someone of clear mind decided that they were going to engage in this act. There's very few diagnoses that would lead to someone not knowing, right? The idea that someone in their intentionality of knowingly or purposefully, there's very few. One of the most common ones is a psychotic disorder. There's nothing to suggest that this guy has ever suffered from a psychotic disorder. Doesn't mean that he never did experience these symptoms, but there's nothing that we've seen so far to indicate that that has occurred. And it's certainly possible that maybe that there were some things that happened in his past, traumas, abuses, right? Obsessive compulsive disorders, autism spectrum disorders. The list can go on and on and on of how many things that this person could potentially use. But I don't think any of it's going to be used if he decides not to speak on his own defense.
Okay, Terry, let's make this very clear for everybody. Can you break down the charges against Kohberger and also any possible defenses?
Sure. I mean, he faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and a felony burglary charge for his alleged role in all of these killings. Now, the murders are considered first degree because they were allegedly premeditated. And the felony burglary charge, that's based on the fact that Kohberger allegedly broke into the house to commit a felony. The actual felony was murder. So Idaho is one of 27 states with the death penalty. So if the prosecution requests that, Kohberger faces the possibility of a lethal injection. If not, he faces life in prison. There are currently 8 people on death row in Idaho, but there have only been 2 executions in the past 50 years, so I doubt that he'll get the death penalty. As for his defense, Idaho eliminated the insanity defense in 1982 after John Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity for attempting to assassinate then President Ronald Reagan. But as Dr. Delatorre said, he mentioned that the defendant can use evidence of mental illness to claim that he was not capable of forming the intent to commit that crime. So it'll take some time for this case to work its way, but I definitely think they're going to make it a priority.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I'll bring Bryan in on this. Bryan, we often see insanity defenses in mass murder cases, that not being a real option here. What arguments do you think that the public defender is going to make?
So I think the strongest and probably the only option here is it wasn't him. I mean, today everyone is applauding the police and their investigation and the capture of Bryan Kohberger, but don't forget, a week ago, the court of public opinion thought they were botching this investigation. I can imagine a defense attorney jumping on that and saying, hey, what we all thought at the beginning of this investigation is true, and here are all the different reasons why it's not Bryan Kohberger, why it's this person or that person. Don't forget, even Terry was saying, why are the police letting so many people go so quickly? A defense attorney, I think, is going to jump on that rather than trying to make the argument that, hey, it was him, but because of some sort of mental break, he doesn't have the mens rea or the mental capacity to commit the crime. That dog, I don't think is going to hunt.
And we need to see what the evidence is, right? We need to understand at least what's in the probable cause affidavit, because right now a lot of it is based on speculation. Once we have a better understanding, then we can start talking about a legal case.
Finally, the FBI at the Behavioral Sciences Unit labeled Bryan Kohberger as a disorganized killer, which, in other words, when they investigated the brutal stabbing deaths of the 4 Idaho students, they do a painstakingly slow investigation because the killer was sloppy and left a mess of evidence behind. And according to the parents of victim Kaylee Goncalves, the FBI Behavioral Sciences Unit found that her injuries were far worse than all the other victims. Now, as I described before about disorganized offenders or killers, they usually leave their victims in the same position as which they were killed. Now, according to the FBI, at the Behavioral Analysis Unit, Behavioral Analysis Unit, or the BAU, they said the following: that disorganized offenders like Kohberger usually leave their victims in the same position in which they were killed, like in bed, in which the bodies that were found in Idaho, and make no attempt to conceal the body, just like the Idaho College Students Massacre. Now, a common method used by disorganized offenders is the blitz attack, which is where the offender uses extreme force on the victims to gain control over them quickly, just like at the home of the Moscow, Idaho College students murder. Usually the murders are sadistic. The disorganized offender uses overkill. A disorganized offender may stab their victim repeatedly, even after death, including one victim who was stabbed 19 times. The disorganized serial killer is prone to paraphilia, a sexual perversion or sexual deviation. Sadistic paraphilic fantasies can lead to sexualized violence, including serial homicide, much like that we saw with Son of Sam and the BTK killer. Mutilation of body parts is a standard feature of this paraphilia. The disorganized serial killer will dismember or cut the body, including parts of the face of the victims. University of Idaho stabbing victim Kaylee Goncalves' injuries were significantly more brutal than her best friend Madison Mogen, sources told News Nation on Sunday. The only thing that is missing is the murder weapon. Where is it? Well, according to investigators, Bryan Kohberger made a trip near Pennsylvania, that may have ditched a weapon. Idaho, that may have ditched a weapon in a remote area just north of Moscow, Idaho. Whether he dumped the weapon or not, one thing is for certain, that there is enough evidence here that may suspect that Bryan Kohberger is guilty of all 4 people. But like I said before, Bryan Kohberger is afforded the presumption of innocence of all 4 murders. This video is basically just to understand the psychology of the person engaged in these 4 murders. Hopefully soon after the trial, we'll get to know the truth. Maybe. I'm Adam Fitzgerald. Have a good evening.